Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I've started getting into making TikToks and kind of like the idea of being able to talk about the latest patches and updates that happen to the game and the games that I've been playing in general. And it's really fun, and I'd love to be able to just share my thoughts on each of the changes that happen every experimental card. So that's what today's video is going to be essentially about. There's a new experimental card currently on the live version of the game. We had some changes to Reaper, Zarya, Moira, McCree, and Baptiste. Some are more egregious than others. If you don't play any of these characters, a lot of these changes are just going to appear to be very subtle and maybe not really that big of a deal. But there are a couple that are actually going to probably, in my opinion, actually sway a couple heroes and how often they're going to be played for sure. There are a few other changes that I don't really think matter, to be honest. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the first one, which is Reaper. Reaper had a change to his lifesteal where they increased it from 30% to 35%. And the developer's comments were, this adjustment brings Reaper's self-healing with his Hellfire shotguns back to about where it was before the recent tuning changes. Some Reaper players out there, especially the more casual audience, might see this as a really good thing and might be excited about this. However, by just simply crunching the numbers, it's just so insignificant of a value change that you're really not going to notice any difference whatsoever, to be honest. Just to kind of put things into perspective, assuming that every pellet of Reaper's shotgun hits the enemy, a full barrel shot of Reaper's shotgun will do 120 damage. In the current live version of the game, that will heal you from the 30% lifesteal. That will heal you 36 health. And now with the new 35%, that's going to go up from 36 to 42 health instead, from the same 120 body shot. You only really get 6 extra HP, and that's assuming that all of Reaper's pellets actually hit the same target, and none of them are headshots. And this is what I'm talking about. Despite the fact that you have to land all of your pellets to get just 6 extra HP, let's be honest, unless you're a really high level player who has like amazing aim and can track really well, chances are you're probably not going to be really hitting most of your pellets most of the time, in which case you're not even going to be getting that extra 6 HP in the first place. And to make matters even worse, to even really see a noticeable difference from the 35 to 30%, you have to be landing consistent full body shot after body shot, not counting headshots, of course, on bigger targets like tanks, to really see any significant impact on the 5% lifesteal increase. It's just so insignificant, especially with characters like McCree, who can just do so much damage that 6 extra HP, where you have to be kind of mid to close range, more closer range than McCree, that it's really not going to be that big of a difference, to be honest, in my opinion. All right, next up we have McCree. McCree actually got some pretty noticeable nerfs in this experimental patch, although to what degree this is going to actually harm his playstyle, I personally don't think it's going to be that big of a nerf to McCree. Sure, overall it'll probably reduce his damage output a bit, but I think that the devs did in this experimental part kind of missed the mark, in my opinion. McCree's Peacekeeper, the reload time got increased from 1.2 seconds to 1.5 seconds. So now reloading takes an extra 0.3 seconds total in order to do a full reload on your gun. His combat roll, the distance that you actually roll, also got reduced by 20%. For anybody who's been playing the game for quite a few years, you probably remember the old McCree, where it felt like his roll was very short. It felt like it was only really good for going around a corner and wasn't really useful for traveling distance like it does right now in the live version of the game. And the developer's comments about this is that much of McCree's recent success can be attributed to his increased maximum health, and we think that aspect is working well to help solidify a close to mid-range role for him. We're reverting the combat roll distance and Peacekeeper reload times as they lead to longer distance flashbang initiations and made the burst damage from Fan the Hammer less of a costly investment. In terms of what they're saying right here, in my opinion, they definitely hit the mark in what they intended with this patch. However, personally, I feel like most people are having issues with the fact that because McCree had so many buffs throughout these last few years that he kind of ended up to the current state where he is right now, he's just a little too well-rounded. In my personal opinion, the most egregious part of it, I can live with the 25 extra HP, but in my opinion, the fact that his flashbang, and I've always felt this way about McCree even before he's reached the current state he is right now. And I feel like this is something that everyone in the community has always really kind of not been a big fan of about McCree, about the fan hammer stun combo. But because of the fact he was kind of weaker in other areas, that he was easier to play around, that they kind of gave him a passing mark. But because of the fact he's gotten progressively power crept throughout these last few years, that he's now in a state where like he's just a well-rounded character that can just duel practically anybody. That now these aspects that people could kind of tolerate are now starting to become in the limelight, where it's harder to punish this hero's weaknesses now that his strengths start becoming way more dominant. In my personal opinion, his stun is probably the most egregious aspect of his kit. The fact that it's just so forgiving in the radius of the stun is what I think needs to be addressed, because there's a lot of interactions that could easily be more solved if they just reduce the radius of it, kind of similar to how they did to Orissa's Halt, where if they reduce the radius, it becomes a lot harder to actually skill shot it. And I think if they do the same thing to McCree, it would do a lot to rein McCree more in and make things like the fan the hammer stun combo a lot easier to tolerate. Now Baptiste actually got a change that I think honestly doesn't really matter. For his exo boots, the charge time has been increased from 0.7 seconds to a full 1 second. Now, in case you don't understand what this means, essentially, whenever you hold down the crouch button on Baptiste, it'll charge up his boots, which will let him, when you jump, you'll jump really high up into the air. Depending on how much you charge will determine how high up in the air you'll actually jump. So getting the full charge on the live version of the game will take a full 0.7 seconds, whereas in the experimental card, it takes a full second. Now, from my experience, and I'm a support main for anybody who knows me or watches my live streams, I'm a diamond support player, so I play a lot of Baptiste, especially since I feel like I'm kind of forced into Baptiste jail a lot of times. From my experience, this change is practically insignificant. It doesn't really make any difference to how Baptiste plays, in my opinion. Primarily because of the fact that Baptiste isn't really a new character. He's been out in the game for quite a while now, that players have gotten pretty good with him. To be honest, if you're using his exo boots, it's mostly to get into good positioning, in which case you need to already have good positioning to make good use out of it. If you find yourself dying while using the exo boots, it's most likely because of the fact that you're either out in the open, in which case the exo boots is the least of your worries. And you probably need to work on your positioning in the first place to where you're not out in the open to get killed. Either that or you're jumping too high up where a sniper kills you. One of the two. But all in all, I feel like this is really a very insignificant nerf. Sure, you're going to notice it, but because of the fact that it's only 0.3 seconds and you're typically using it to get from one good position to another good position, that the enemy's not really going to be able to punish you for something like this, I don't really think this is that big of a deal in terms of a nerf. All right, next up, we have Zarya. Now, I've been playing the experimental card a lot lately, just trying to get a feel for all of these heroes. And from my experience, a lot of people seem to not really notice the Zarya changes, which are that her primary fire, her beam damage now scales from 75 to 170 damage per second, down from 75 to 170 damage per second. And the developer's comment is Zarya's base damage wasn't adjusted after the beam hit detection changes a while back, but she wasn't seeing much use at the time either. Now that she has a more dominant presence in the variety of team compositions, we're looking at reducing her beam's average damage, though the same maximum damage is still achievable. So essentially the change makes it so that the base minimum damage that your beam does at 0 charge does less damage now compared to what it does on the live version of the game. And this is actually a very big change. Unless you're a really good Zarya player who's able to get very consistent high charge values from like 80% or higher consistently, this is going to be one of those changes that if you're a regular off-tank player or a regular Zarya player, you're definitely going to notice these changes because you're going to be doing slightly less damage than what you're usually doing on the live version of the game. And for the casual players, you're probably not going to notice this as much just because of the fact that you kind of don't have a feel for what her regular damage output is in the first place. So if you happen to be a player who doesn't regularly play Zarya and you're not used to playing her, or you're not very good at finding ways to charge your bubbles, you're definitely going to be noticing a bit of a damage increase overall. Just because of the fact that it dramatically changes the damage outputs, mostly for the lower charge percent values. Last but not least, I saved the best one for last, and in my opinion, I think people are going to be heavily sleeping on Moira with this new experimental change, assuming that it does hit live, which I think it will. But they made it so that her biotic grasp, the resource regeneration, is now 3 times higher while channeling coalescence. Now what this means is that your resource meter is passively regenerating while you're using coalescence, or anytime you're not using your primary fire in general. So what this change does is that it makes it so that your resource meter regenerates 3 times faster than usual, specifically when using your ultimate coalescence. And the developer's comment for this is that many channeled ultimate abilities automatically reload the hero's weapon as they're locked out from reloading for a short time. The new regeneration rate will refill about half of Moira's biotic energy resource over the full duration of coalescence. This doesn't fully refill Moira's energy from empty, as it would be unfortunate to lose that portion of her gameplay if players were able to fully cycle between ultimates with healing alone. Now, despite what they just said right there, the fact that this will refill at least about half of Moira's tank in general while using coalescence is absolutely massive. I really don't think people completely understand how big of a deal this is, especially since because of the fact that not so long ago, like a few patches ago, she received a buff to her orbs where they reduced the cooldown for orbs. And one of the biggest differences that I noticed for her orbs from that change was the fact that it felt really nice where during the moments where you did run out of juice in your resource tank, that having that 2 or 3 second shorter cooldown on your orbs made it a lot easier to still throw out healing orbs when you're out of juice on your resource tank. And now adding this on top of it, for any of you who happen to watch my 5 tips no one tells you about for Moira guide video, I'll post a link in the top right corner of the screen if you want to check it out, or in the description of this video. But one of the tips that I gave in that video was the fact that one of the things you should try to be doing is that before you use coalescence, you want to try dumping as much of your healing resource meter into your team before you use coalescence if you can. This way you can truly max min your healing output, and this is how you're going to be getting those outrageous amounts of healing per 10-minute stats that you might see some people do. In the current live version of the game, using coalescence on an empty tank, you would usually get about a third, roughly between like a third and a quarter of your tank back, just from passive regeneration alone. And now with this new buff, with her getting half her tank back, Moira is basically in a state now where if you have proper resource management with her healing, you should never run out of healing. No joke. I literally just had a game like an hour ago where I played Moira in the experimental patch, and I had 18,000 healing in one round per 10 minutes, which is outrageous. And it's just primarily because of the fact that I'm literally always healing. I'm able to always heal with Moira because of the fact that her coalescence regenerates half my tank now. My orbs are on a shorter cooldown, so I'm able to spam them like no tomorrow, which combined with my primary fire, my healing spray, I just have so much healing that I have no doubt in my mind that assuming this buff comes to life, which I'm pretty sure it will based on the wording of the dev's developer notes, that Moira will probably become the de facto AoE healer straight up. Okay, she already has the highest AoE healing in the game. She's going to be in a state where she's always going to be able to constantly heal. She could very easily end up in a place where her spot in the team is the de facto main healer, essentially. The only difference between her and Baptiste with this new change is essentially that Baptiste is more for damage output while still being able to maintain some sort of AoE healing, whereas Moira is the true, lo and behold, AoE healer and just the best raw healer in the game. So I'm heavily expecting Moira to become the new underdog in ranked in your ladder games when this patch happens to go live. All right, so that's it for today's news roundup, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know how you enjoyed this. I'm trying to do more of these now, especially since I'm starting to stream the game less as of recently, just due to the lower popularity of Overwatch in general. But I still want to be able to maintain some sort of connection to it, just because of how much I love the game. If you enjoyed the video, though, please give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. It's the best way to help show your support for the channel and show me that you like content like this and would like me to make more of it, as well as lets you know when I post more of this as well. I stream on Twitch regularly, usually around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I stream a variety of different games, typically shooter games like Apex Legends and Overwatch. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. You guys have a good one, and I'll see you guys next time.